Martin Buber. Tales of the Hasidim. Book 1. The Early Masters. Elimelech of Lizhensk. His watch. When Rabbi Elimelech said the prayer of sanctification on the Sabbath, he occasionally took out his watch and looked at it, for in that hour his soul threatened to dissolve in bliss, and so he looked at his watch in order to steady himself in time and the world. When the Sabbath began, Rabbi Elimelech could not endure the voices proclaiming it. He had to stop up his ears to keep the holy thunder of the Sabbath from deafening him. Good works. Rabbi Elimelech once set out for home from a city he had visited, and all the Hasidim accompanied him for a long stretch of the way. When his carriage drove through the gate, he got out, told the coachman to drive on, and walked behind the carriage in the midst of the throng. The astonished Hasidim asked him why he had done this. He answered, "When I saw the great devotion with which you were performing, the good work of accompanying me, I could not bear to be excluded from it." Answers. Rabbi Elimelech once said, "I am certain to have a share in the coming world. When I stand in the court of justice above, and they ask me, 'Have you studied all you should?' I shall answer, 'No.' Then they will ask, 'Have you prayed all you should?' And again I shall answer, 'No.' And they will put a third question to me, 'Have you done all the good you should?' And this time too, I shall have to give the same answer. Then they will pronounce the verdict, 'You told the truth. For the sake of truth, you deserve a share in the coming world.' The first light is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Rabbi Elimelech said, "Before the soul enters the air of this world, it is conducted through all worlds. Last of all, it is shown the first light, which once when the world was created, illumined all things, and which God removed when mankind grew corrupt. Why is the soul shown this light? So that, from this hour on, it may yearn to attain it and approach it rung by rung in its life on earth. And those who reach it, the Tzadikim into them the light enters, and out of them it shines into the world again. That is the reason why it was hidden." On Sinai, Rabbi Elimelech said, "Not only that I remember how all the souls of Israel stood by the burning mountain of Sinai, I even remember what souls stood next to me." God sings. The psalm reads, "For singing to our God is good." Rabbi Elimelech expounded this. It is good if man can bring about that God sings within him. The servants. A very old woman who, in her youth, had been a servant in Rabbi Elimelech's house, was often asked to tell some story or other about the Tzadik. But whenever they urged her, she said, "I don't know anything. There's only one thing I remember. During the week, there were always crosswords in the kitchen, for servants are apt to quarrel. But on the eve of the Sabbath, something came over us. We embraced, and one said to the other, 'Dear heart, forgive me whatever wrong I have done you during this week.'" The first sin. Rabbi Chaim of Zons told, "My holy master, Rabbi Elimelech, used to say that if a man wants to turn to God, he must go back of each sin, back to the one which gave rise to it, and so on to the first sin. And even for this, he has to do penance. He himself did penance for treading on his mother's breasts with his feet when he was a babe in arms." The penitent. For 6 years and then for another 6 years, Rabbi David of Lelov had done great penance. He had fasted from one Sabbath to the next, and subjected himself to all manner of rigid discipline. But even when the second 6 years were up, he felt that he had not reached perfection, and did not know how to attain what he still lacked. Since he had heard of Rabbi Elimelech, the healer of souls, he journeyed to him to ask his help. On the evening of the Sabbath, he came before the Tzadik with many others. The master shook hands with everyone except Rabbi David, but from him he turned and did not give him a glance. The Rabbi of Lelov was appalled and left. But then he thought it over and decided that the master must have taken him for someone else. So he approached him in the evening, after the prayer, and held out his hand. But he was treated just as before. He wept all night, and in the morning resolved not to enter the Tzadik's house of prayer again, but to leave for home at the end of the Sabbath. And yet, when the hour of the holy third meal had come, the meal at which Rabbi Elimelech spoke words of teaching, he could not restrain himself and crept up to the window. There he heard the rabbi say, "Sometimes people come to me who fast and torment themselves, and many a one does penance for 6 years, and then for another 12 whole years. And after that, they consider themselves worthy of the Holy Spirit, and come and ask me to draw it down to them. I am to supply the little they still lack. But the truth of the matter is that all their discipline and all their pains are less than a drop in the sea. And what's more, all that service of theirs does not rise to God, but to the idol of their pride. Such people must turn to God by turning utterly from all they have been doing, and begin to serve from the bottom up and with a truthful heart." When Rabbi David heard these words, the Spirit moved him with such force that he almost lost consciousness. Trembling and sobbing, he stood at the window. When the Havdalah was concluded, he went to the door with faltering breath, opened it in great fear, and waited on the threshold. Rabbi Elimelech rose from his chair, ran up to his motionless visitor, embraced him and said, "Blessed be he that comes." Then he drew him toward the table and seated him at his side. But now Eleazar, the Tzadik's son, could no longer restrain his amazement. "Father," he said, "why, that is the man you turned away twice because you could not endure the mere sight of him." "No, indeed," Rabbi Elimelech answered. "That was an entirely different person. Don't you see that this is our dear Rabbi David?" The impure fire. On his journey to Rabbi Elimelech, whom after the death of the great Maggid he had chosen for his second teacher, young Jacob Yitzhak, later the Rabbi of Lublin, came to a little town, and in the house of prayer heard the Rav of that place reciting the morning prayer with deep fervor. He stayed with him over the Sabbath and noticed the same fervor in all he said and did. When he came to know him a little better, he asked him whether he had ever served a Tzadik. The answer was no. This surprised Jacob Yitzhak, for the way cannot be learned out of a book or from hearsay, but can only be communicated from person to person. He asked the devout Rav to go to his teacher with him, and he agreed. But when they crossed Rabbi Elimelech's threshold, he did not come forward to meet his disciple with his customary affectionate greeting, but turned to the window and paid no attention to his visitors. Jacob Yitzhak realized that the rejection was directed to his companion, took the violently excited Rav to an inn, and returned alone. Rabbi Elimelech advanced toward him, greeted him fondly, and then said, "What struck you, my friend, to bring with you a man in whose face I can see the tainted image of God?" Jacob Yitzhak listened to these words in dismay, but did not venture to reply or to ask a question. But Rabbi Elimelech understood what was going on within him and continued, "You know that there is one place lit only by the planet Venus, where good and evil are blended. Sometimes a man begins to serve God, and ulterior motives and pride enter into his service. Then, unless he makes a very great effort to change, he comes to live in that dim place and does not even know it. He is even able to exert great fervor, for close by is the place of the impure fire. From there he fetches his blaze and kindles his service with it, and does not know from where he has taken the flame." Jacob Yitzhak told the stranger the words of Rabbi Elimelech, and the Rav recognized the truth in them. In that very hour, he turned to God, ran weeping to the Master, who instantly gave him his help, and with this help, he found the way. Satan's threat. It is told, Satan came to Rabbi Elimelech and said, "I simply won't stand for it any longer that you persecute me with your Hasidim. Don't imagine you can get the best of me. I shall make all the world Hasidim, and then you will no longer have power." Some time after this, Rabbi Elimelech went into the house of study with a cane to drive out some of the Hasidim. No one knows why he did not do it. I suppose he did not venture to single out the messengers of Satan. Elijah. Rabbi Elimelech told about a man to whom the prophet Elijah had appeared. Someone expressed surprise that this could be, since even Master Ibn Ezra, who had a spirit belonging to a far loftier sphere, had, according to his own words, been denied such a vision. "What you say is true," said the Tzadik, "and yet it is as I have said. You know that after Elijah was transfigured, he became the angel of the covenant, and is present at the circumcision of every Jewish boy. But how can this be, since circumcision always takes place in the hour after prayer, and many circumcisions occur in the same hour in all parts of the world? I shall tell you how. Elijah moved all the people of Israel with the spirit of turning, so that they fell on their faces and cried out the name of the true God, and because of this he was given the whole soul of Israel. And so, wherever a boy is brought to the covenant, a part of Elijah's soul is present, and enters the boy, a big part or a little part, according to the kind of child and the root of its being. And if the growing boy develops his Elijah soul to the full, then he has a vision of the Elijah soul contained within him. Thus the man of whom I was speaking made manifest through his good works the small part of the prophet which was within him. But Ibn Ezra did not have the strength to perfect the great part he had been given. A transaction. It is told, the emperor in Vienna issued an edict which was bound to make thoroughly miserable the already oppressed Jews in Galicia. At that time, an earnest and studious man by the name of Feivel lived in Rabbi Elimelech's house of study. One night he rose, entered the Tzadik's room, and said to him, "Master, I have a suit against God." And even as he spoke, he was horrified at his own words. But Rabbi Elimelech answered him, "Very well, but the court is not in session by night." The next day, 2 Tzadikim came to Lizensk, Israel of Koznitz, and Jacob Yitzhak of Lublin, and stayed in Rabbi Elimelech's house. After the midday meal, the rabbi had the man who had spoken to him called and said, "Now, tell us about your lawsuit." "I have not the strength to do it now," Feivel said falteringly. "Then I give you the strength," said Rabbi Elimelech. And Feivel began to speak. "Why are we held in bondage in this empire? Does not God say in the Torah, 'For unto me the children of Israel are servants'? And even though he has sent us to alien lands, still, wherever we are, he must leave us full freedom to serve him." To this Rabbi Elimelech replied, "We know God's reply, for it also is written in the passage of reproof through Moses and the prophets. But now, both the plaintiff and the defendant shall leave the courtroom as the rule prescribes, so that the judges may not be influenced by them. So go out, Rabbi Feivel. You, Lord of the world, we cannot send out, because your glory fills the earth, and without your presence, not one of us could live for even a moment. But we herewith inform you that we shall not let ourselves be influenced by you either." Then the 3 sat in judgment, silently and with closed eyes. After an hour, they called in Feivel and gave him the verdict that he was in the right. In the same hour, the edict in Vienna was cancelled. Upsetting the bowl. It is told, once Rabbi Elimelech was eating the Sabbath meal with his disciples. The servant set the soup bowl down before him. Rabbi Elimelech raised it and upset it, so that the soup poured over the table. All at once young Mendel, later the rabbi of Raimanov, cried out, "Rabbi, what are you doing? They will put us all in jail." The other disciples smiled at these foolish words. They would have laughed out loud had not the presence of their teacher restrained them. He, however, did not smile. He nodded to young Mendel and said, "Do not be afraid, my son." Some time after this, it became known that on that day, an edict directed against the Jews of the whole country had been presented to the emperor for his signature. Time after time, he took up his pen, but something always happened to interrupt him. Finally, he signed the paper. Then he reached for the sand container, but took the inkwell instead and upset it on the document. Hereupon he tore it up and forbade them to put the edict before him again. The miraculous meal. They tell, on New Year's Day, it was usual for 15 Hasidim to come to Rabbi Elimelech, and his wife gave them to eat and to drink. But she could not serve them very generous portions, because at that time she did not have much money to spend for the household. Once, quite late in the day, no less than 40 men came instead of the expected 15. "Will you have enough for them to eat?" asked Rabbi Elimelech. "You know how we are fixed," she replied. Before the afternoon prayer, he asked her again, "Couldn't we divide what food we have among the 40? For they have, after all, come under the shadow of my roof." "We have hardly enough for 15, said his wife. When he said the evening prayer, the rabbi prayed fervently to God, who provides for all creatures. After the prayer, he announced, "Now let everyone come and eat." When the 40 had eaten all they wanted, the bowls and platters were still full. The wine of life. It is told, once, on the second evening of the Feast of Weeks, the Hasidim were seated around Rabbi Elimelech's table and rejoicing in the feast. The rabbi looked around and nodded to each in turn, for he rejoiced in their joy. And he said smilingly, "See, we have everything here to make us joyful. Is there anything still lacking?" Then a headstrong, foolish young man cried out, "All we still lack is to drink of the wine of life, like the devout in paradise." The Tzadik said to him, "Take the pole on your shoulders, fasten 2 pails to it, and go to the gates of the cemetery. When you get there, set down the pails, turn your back on them, and say, 'Elimelech has sent me to fetch wine.' Then turn around, lift the full pails, fasten them to the pole, and bring them here to us. But be careful not to talk to anyone, no matter who should speak to you." The young man shuddered, but did as he was bidden. He fetched the wine at the gate of the cemetery, shuddered, and brought it back with him. All about him the moonless night vibrated with the sound of voices, begging him for a drop. Old voices and young voices, and they all sighed and moaned. He hastened on in silence, and behind him he heard the dragging of countless ghostly steps. He was almost on Elimelech's threshold when they approached him from the other side. "Now you can't do anything to me," he shouted. The pole broke in two. The pails fell and cracked, and he felt something strike him on both cheeks. He tottered through the half-open door. Outside, all was silent as death. Inside, the Tzadik spoke, "Fool, sit down at our table." The fish vendor. They say that Rabbi Elimelech did not celebrate with all due rites the post-Sabbath meal, which is called King David's Feast, and that for this the king was angry with him. They also tell this. One Friday afternoon, a man in peasant's dress, who was carrying a basket of fish on his back, came to Rabbi Elimelech and offered to sell him his wares. He spoke the dialect of that region. The Tzadik sent the vendor to his wife, but she told him to go away because she had finished preparing the food for the Sabbath several hours ago. The man refused to be denied and again went to the rabbi. He sent word to his wife to buy a little something from him, but she persisted in her rejection. For the third time, the man entered the Tzadik's room, fetched his fish out of the basket, threw them on the floor where they wriggled around, and grumbled, "It would be a good idea for you to use them for the King David's feast." Then Rabbi Elimelech raised his eyebrows. They were very big, and he was in the habit of raising them whenever he wanted to look at anyone closely. He was silent for a while, and then said, "I no longer have the strength to celebrate your meal with all due rites, but I shall command my children to do so." Gruel. During the last 2 years of his life, Rabbi Elimelech ate and drank only very little, and even that little he took only because his family urged him to. Once, when his son Eliezer begged him with tears to eat at least enough to keep him alive, he said with a smile on his lips, "Oh, what coarse food you set before me. Now, if I could only get a plate of gruel, the kind my brother Zusia and I were served in the Little Red Inn on the Dniester in the days of our wanderings." Sometime after Rabbi Elimelech's death, his son set out on a journey to the Little Red Inn on the Dniester. When he arrived there, he asked for a night's lodging and inquired what there was for supper. "We are poor people," said the innkeeper's wife. "We give the peasants vodka in exchange for flour and dried peas and beans. Most of this my husband takes to market and barters for more vodka, and the rest we eat, so I can offer you nothing but gruel for supper." "Prepare it for me right away," said Rabbi Eliezer. By the time he had said the evening prayer, the soup was on the table. He ate one plate of it, and then another, and asked for a third helping. "Tell me what it was you put into the soup to make it so tasty." "Believe me, sir," she said, "I put nothing into it at all." But when he pressed her, she finally said, "Well, if it tastes so good to you, paradise itself is responsible for it." And now she told, "It is very long ago, but once two pious men stopped here. You could see that they were true Tzadikim. And because I had nothing to serve them except gruel, I prayed to God while I was cooking it. Lord of the world, I have nothing else in the house, and you have everything. So have mercy upon your tired and hungry servants, and put some herbs from paradise into their soup." And when the gruel was put on the table, the two of them emptied the whole big bowl, and I refilled it, and they emptied it a second time. And one of them said to me, "Daughter, your soup tastes of paradise." And just now I prayed again. The true wonder. They asked Rabbi Elimelech. In the scriptures we read that Pharaoh said to Moses and Aaron, "Show a wonder for you." How are we to understand this? It would have been more logical for him to say, "Show a wonder to me." Rabbi Elimelech explained, "Magicians know what they want to accomplish and how to accomplish it. It is not a wonder for them, but only for the beholders. But those who work something because God gives them power to do it know of no whence and no how, and the wonder which rises out of their doing overwhelms them themselves." And this is what Pharaoh meant. "Do not pretend to me. Get you a wonder from the true world, so that it may thus testify for you." The hidden Tzadikim. Rabbi Gabriel, a disciple of Rabbi Elimelech's, once went to visit his master in a carriage he had rented from a man of uncouth bearing, who to his annoyance insisted on telling him coarse and improper jokes during the entire drive. When they came to the Tzadik's house, Elimelech ran toward the coachman, greeted him with great happiness, and scarcely noticed Rabbi Gabriel. On the way back, the disciple wanted to perform services for the man who had been treated with such respect, but was rejected with a curt phrase. A few months later, Rabbi Gabriel went to the city and there saw the coachman talking to a mason. He followed the two men to their inn, unobserved, and heard one say to the other, "At Melech's, you still hear a bit of truth, but nowhere else." And the other repeated, "At Melech's, you hear a bit of truth." Then they happened to see the rabbi in a corner and shouted at him, "Get out! What are you doing among common folks?" And there was nothing for it. He had to go. After Rabbi Elimelech's death, Gabriel was driving through a wood when the carriage of his friend, Rabbi Uri, came toward him. They dismounted and walked away together. Then Gabriel told his friend what he had once heard the coachman and the mason say to each other. The two leaned against trees and wept and lamented. A bit of truth was in the world, and now that too has been taken from us. The artery. Rabbi Moshe Ephraim, the Baal Shem's grandson, was against the Polish Hasidim because he had heard that they mortified their flesh too severely and destroyed the image of God in themselves instead of making perfect every part of their body and merging it with the soul into one holy vessel for the service of the Lord. When after the death of Rabbi Elimelech, his disciple, Rabbi Mendel of Rymanov, came to Moshe Ephraim to ask him about a successor, as his dying master had bidden him, he was recognized as a Pole and given a rather curt and cool reception. This made him feel so sad that a change came over his face. Rabbi Moshe Ephraim watched him attentively. His brow, which had paled, and his wide-open eyes were not those of a base man. He asked him kindly, "Have you studied with a Tzadik?" "I served my teacher, Rabbi Elimelech," said Mendel. Then Rabbi Ephraim looked at him even more attentively and asked, "And what seemed most wonderful to you about that wonderful man?" But while he was putting this question, he thought, Now this Hasid with his luminous face will reveal his true colors and tell me some miracle tale. Rabbi Mendel replied, "Day by day, when my master was sunk in the contemplation of the awfulness of God, his arteries grew as stiff as hard ropes. And the artery behind the ear, which stirs at nothing in the world and does not tremble until the hour of death, day after day, I saw that artery throb with a strong pulse." Rabbi Moshe Ephraim was silent. Then he said, "I did not know that." Twice he repeated, "I did not know that." And he received Rabbi Mendel like a son. Shneur Zalman of Ladi, the Rav. No returning. In the years immediately after his marriage, Zalman boarded with his parents-in-law, according to the custom. But his aloofness, his manner of praying, and all the ways in which he performed his service to God were strange to them, and while they admired his learning, they thought him a fool. Their daughter rejected their demands to ask for a letter of divorce from her husband, and so they had to content themselves with making life difficult for him. They refused him candles, so that he had to study at the window by the light of the moon, and in winter nights, when he often stayed up until dawn, they let him suffer cold. This went on until, at the age of 20, he set out for the great Maggid in Mezritch. Later, when the fame of Rabbi Zalman began to spread, his mother-in-law regretted the hardships which she and her husband, who had died in the meantime, had imposed on the Tzadik, and begged him to live in her house again. She would see to it, she said, that he lacked nothing, and would also take care of his Hasidim. Rabbi Zalman refused her invitation, and when the woman did not cease pressing him, he said, "Look, who can be better off than the child in his mother's womb? He need not worry about his food and his drink. A light burns upon his head, and all day he learns the entire Torah. But when the child is born, an angel comes and strikes him on the mouth, and he forgets all he has learned. And yet, even if he were able to return, he would not want to. Why do you suppose? Because he has reached his full measure." Permission. Zalman talked it over with his brother, and they decided to go to study with the holy Maggid of Mezritch. Then he asked his wife to consent to this, and she did. But she made him promise to return after a year and a half. She had saved up 30 rubles. These she gave him, and he bought a horse and carriage. His brother, however, had not asked his wife's consent. When they came to the city of Orsha, the horse fell down and died. "That is because you set out without permission," Zalman said to his brother. "And what has happened means that you must not take this course. So you go home, and I shall continue on my way, and whatever I attain, I will share with you." Then they parted, and Zalman proceeded on foot. The gaze of the master. The room of the great Maggid adjoined that in which his disciples slept. Sometimes he went to them at night, a light in his hand, and looked into their sleeping faces. Once he bent down to the low bench by the stove, on which young Zalman lay under a threadbare, three-cornered cover. He looked at him for a long time, and then said to himself, "Miracle of miracles, that so great a God lives in so frail a dwelling." Upward. Rabbi Shneur Zalman told, "Before I went to Mezritch, my service was based on reflection, and from this arose my love and my fear of God. In Mezritch, I mounted to the rung where awareness is, in itself, love and fear. When I first heard the Holy Maggid say, 'God's attribute of mercy is our love of God. God's attribute of rigor is our fear of God,' I regarded this as an interpretation. But then I saw that it is so. The mercy of God is the love of God. The rigor of God is the fear of God." The language of birds. On his second journey to Mezritch, young Zalman visited Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz. Rabbi Pinhas wanted to teach him the language of birds and the language of plants, but the younger man refused. "There is only one thing men need understand," he said. In his old age, Rabbi Shneur Zalman was once driving through the country with his grandson. Birds were hopping about and twittering everywhere. The rabbi put his head out of the carriage for a while. "How fast they chatter," he said to the child. "They have their own alphabet. All you need do is listen and grasp well, and you will understand their language." End quote. Concerning ardent zeal, after the Maggid died, Shneur Zalman decided to leave the town of Mezritch for good. When he parted from the Maggid's son, from Rabbi Abraham, the angel, who had instructed him in secret wisdom, his teacher said he would accompany him and got into the carriage. When they were out of the city gate, Rabbi Abraham called to the coachman, "Urge on your horses and let them run until they forget they are horses." Zalman took the words to heart. "It will take me a while to learn this way of serving properly," he said, and remained in Mezritch for another year. At the lower end, after the death of his teacher, the great Maggid, Shneur Zalman used to go to Rabbi Menahem of Vitebsk and was regarded as his disciple, even though his years of studying were actually over. On the Sabbath and on feast days, all the Hasidim ate at their rabbi's table. Shneur Zalman always sat at the lower end. On New Year's Eve, the rabbi of Vitebsk saw that his place was empty. He went to the house of study, where he found Zalman standing and praying, listened for a time, unobserved, and went back into the room. "Do not disturb him," he said. "He is delighting in God, and God in him." To God. Once Zalman interrupted his prayers and said, "I do not want your paradise. I do not want your coming world. I want you, and you only." Extricated from time. Rabbi Shneur Zalman told his Hasidim, "I was walking in the street toward evening and happened to see something improper. I was deeply troubled that I had not guarded my eyes, placed myself with my face to a wall, and cried my heart out. When I turned around, I saw that it was dark, and the time for the afternoon prayer had passed. Then I took counsel with myself. I extricated myself from time and said the prayer." Fear. When Hasidim began to come to him, and he happened to look out of the window and saw a throng approaching, he was terrified and cried, "What do they want of me? Why do they come to me? What do they see in me?" Then his wife said to him, "Be calm. They are not coming to you for your sake. They only want you to tell them about the holy Maggid, because you have lived in his shadow." "Then all is well," he said, and his heart grew quiet. "I shall tell them. Yes, I shall tell them." But when he once began to talk, he could no longer keep back the teachings. Where are you? Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Rav of northern White Russia, was put in jail in Petersburg because the Mitnagdim had denounced his principles and his way of living to the government. He was awaiting trial when the chief of the gendarmes entered his cell. The majestic and quiet face of the Rav, who was so deep in meditation that he did not at first notice his visitor, suggested to the chief, who was a thoughtful person, what manner of man he had before him. He began to converse with his prisoner and brought up a number of questions which had occurred to him in reading the scriptures. Finally, he asked, "How are we to understand that God, the all-knowing, said to Adam, 'Where art thou?' Do you believe," answered the Rav, "that the scriptures are eternal, and that every era, every generation, and every man is included in them?" "I believe this," said the other. "Well then," said the Tzadik, "in every era, God calls to every man. Where are you in your world? So many years and days of those allotted to you have passed, and how far have you gotten in your world?" God says something like this, "You have lived 46 years. How far along are you?" When the chief of the gendarmes heard his age mentioned, he pulled himself together, laid his hand on the Rav's shoulder, and cried, "Bravo!" But his heart trembled. Question and answer. The Rav asked a disciple who had just entered his room, "Moshe, what do we mean when we say God?" The disciple was silent. The Rav asked him a second and third time. Then he said, "Why are you silent?" "Because I do not know." "Do you think I know?" said the Rav. "But I must say it, for it is so, and therefore I must say it. He is definitely there, and except for him, nothing is definitely there, and this is he." What he prayed with. The Rav once asked his son, "What do you pray with?" The son understood the meaning of the question, namely, on what he based his prayer. He answered, with the verse, "Every stature shall prostrate itself before thee." Then he asked his father, "And with what do you pray?" He said, "With the floor and the bench." Out of one bowl. Among the disciples of the Maggid of Mezritch was one whose name has been forgotten. No one knows it anymore. But once in the Maggid's house of study, he was regarded as the foremost among his companions, and all who wanted to have the words of their master repeated and explained turned to him. Then came the time when the disciples began to talk and said a worm was gnawing at him. After that he disappeared, and rumor had it that he had taken to drinking. He roamed through the countryside with a staff and knapsack, and drank silently in some inn until he was drunk. Then one wise saying after another came from his lips. Years later, he came to the town of Lozhny, where Rabbi Shneur Zalman was still living at that time, and entered the house of study at an hour when the Rav was teaching there. No one noticed him in the crowd, and he listened for a while. Then he mumbled to himself, "We all ate out of one bowl, but it is he who has all the food," and left the house. When the Rav heard of it, he realized who his visitor was and had them look for him everywhere, for he wanted to persuade him to give up his wandering and stay, but the rover was nowhere to be found. Reflection. One of the mitnagdim once visited the Rav and asked him all sorts of questions. Finally, he wished to know why the Tzadik had a servant at his door who did not admit visitors to him at all times. The Rav put his head in his hands. After a time, he looked up and said, "The head and the trunk form one body, and yet the head must be covered in a different manner and guarded more carefully." The mitnagd was satisfied with this answer and left. But the Tzadik's son was not satisfied. "You did not have to put your head in your hands and reflect in order to give the answer you did," he said. Rabbi Zalman said, "When Korah said to Moses, 'All the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them, wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the assembly of the Lord,' Moses heard and fell on his face. Only after that did he answer Korah. But why? He could have said what he had to say right then and there. But Moses reflected, perhaps these words are sent from above, and Korah is only a messenger. In that case, how could I reply to him? And so he fell on his face and reflected on whether he really sought to lift himself above the rest. And when he had reflected and come to the conclusion that no vestige of such a desire was within him, and according to God's own words, Moses was very humble, more humble than all other men he knew, that Korah had not been sent to him, and he answered his question. Concerning the Messiah, a man once asked the Rav in jest, "Will the Messiah be a Hasid or a mitnagd?" He answered, "I think a mitnagd. For if he were a Hasid, the mitnagdim would not believe in him, but the Hasidim will believe in him, no matter what he is." The dark-tempered and the light-tempered. A wealthy man who was devoted to his studies and known for his stinginess once asked the Rav of Ladi, "How are we to interpret the passage in the Talmud in which we are told that Rabbi Hanina ben Teradian, who publicly instructed his disciples in the teachings in an era of rabid persecution, and to the very day he died as a martyr, doubted that he was appointed to life in the coming world, and that when he expressed his doubt to a friend, he was asked in return whether he had done a single good work, and that he received a reassuring answer only when he claimed to have distributed his money among the poor? How are we to interpret this?" "There are two kinds of men," said the Rav, "those with black gall and those with light. The dark-tempered sit over the books of the teachings and are of a miserly disposition. The light-tempered love company and are generous." Rabbi Hanina was dark-tempered, devoted to his studies, and withdrawn. His merit did not lie in living for the teachings, but in governing his nature and giving freely of what he possessed. But once he had done this, and he had learned to live with his fellow men, his studying was no longer a necessity, but a virtue. Seeing. On a day shortly before his death, the Rav asked his grandson, "Do you see anything?" The boy looked at him in astonishment. Then the Rav said, "All I can still see is the divine nothingness which gives life to the world." The apparition. One night, the wife of Rabbi Mendel of Lubavitch, the Rav's grandson, was awakened by a loud noise coming from her husband's room, which was next to hers. She ran to him and saw Rabbi Mendel lying on the floor by his bed. In reply to her questions, he told her that his grandfather had been to see him. She tried to calm him, but he said, "When a soul from the world above and a soul from this world want to be together, the one must put on a garment and the other must take one off." Once, he said to his close friends, "In the Palestinian Talmud, we read that he who says a word in the name of him who originated it must, in his mind's eye, conjure the author up before him. This is only a fancy. But he who sings a melody, another devised that other is really with him while he sings." And he sang the familiar wordless tune the Rav had sung and hummed time and again the tune. The fervor of the Rav. 17. Shlomo of Karlin. The meeting. The cities of Pinsk and Karlin lie close to each other, the one on the north, the other on the south bank of a river. When Rabbi Shlomo was a poor young man who taught little children in Karlin, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, later the Rabbi of Berdichev, was the Rav of Pinsk. One day he told his servant to go to Karlin and look for a man by the name of Shlomo, son of Yuta. He was to ask him to come to Pinsk. The servant inquired around for a long time. Finally, at the edge of the town, in a ramshackle little house, he found the malamd Shlomo and gave him his message. "I shall get there in time," said Rabbi Shlomo. When he crossed Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's threshold a few hours later, the Rav rose and said, "Blessed be he that comes," and drew up a chair for his guest himself. For an hour they sat opposite each other, with glowing faces, with intense eyes in silence. Then they rose and laughed aloud. "What can they be laughing about?" thought the servant who had been listening at the door. And Rabbi Shlomo made his farewells. But the Hasidim said that through the meeting of these two, the exile, which had been threatening the Jews of that region, had been averted, and that this was the cause of their joyful laughter. He who returned. It is told, Rabbi Aaron of Karlin died young, and Rabbi Shlomo, whose fellow disciple he had been in the house of the great Maggid, and who had followed his elder friend as his teacher, refused to take his place. Then Rabbi Aaron appeared to him in a dream and promised that if he took on himself the yoke of leadership, he would be granted the power of beholding all the wanderings of souls. This promise beguiled him in his dream, and he agreed to assume the succession. The next morning, he was able to see the destinies of the souls of all men. That very day, they brought him a note of request together with a sum of money. The sender was a rich man who lay dying. At the same time, the woman who supervised a home for the poor came to ask him to pray for a pauper under her care, who had been in labor for days and still had not borne her child. Rabbi Shlomo saw that the child could not come into the world until the rich man died, for his soul was to pass into the baby, and the news of the death and the birth did, indeed, come, one on the heels of the other. When the rabbi was told a little later that there was not enough firewood in the home, and that the young mother and her infant son were freezing, he took some of the money he had received from the rich man and told them to buy wood with it, for he told himself, "This child is really the rich man himself, and so it is his own money." Shortly after, he also gave what remained of the sum for the care of the boy. Presently, the woman left with other beggars and went from town to town. When the boy was 6 years old, they happened to come to Karlin again and learned that the bar mitzvah, confirmation of the rich man's youngest son, was to be celebrated soon. According to the custom, the poor were invited to attend the feast, and mother and son went with the others. But the boy could not be persuaded to sit at the pauper's table. In a loud voice and with arrogant gestures, he demanded a place at the head of the guest table. Rabbi Shlomo, who noticed this, urged them to give in to the child, so that he might not cause a disturbance. He is the master of the house, after all. he thought to himself, and he is asking no more than his due. When the meal was served, the same thing occurred. The boy insisted that he be served with the choicest food, and again the Tzadik let him have his way. When the mother was asked whether her son always behaved in this way, she said she had never observed anything of the kind in him. At the end of the feast, when Rabbi Shlomo had already gone home, they distributed money among the poor. When the boy's turn came, he cried, "How dare you offer me coppers? Get gold out of the chest!" Then the sons of the rich man threw him out bodily. When Rabbi Shlomo discovered how they had treated their returned father, he begged heaven to take from him his miraculous power. Refusal. It is told, those in heaven wanted to reveal to Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin the language of birds, the language of trees, and the language of the serving angels. But he refused to learn them before finding out of what importance each of these languages was for the service of God. Not until after he had been told this did he consent to learn them, and then he served God with them also. The stages. When Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin was traveling through Russia, he kept enumerating the various stages and said, "These are the stages of the children of Israel, by which they went forth out of the land of Egypt." When they asked him what he meant by this, he said, "The sacred book of splendor interprets God's words. Let us make man in the following way, that from every world, from the highest to the lowest, God took some part, and from all these parts made man. It was to the worlds that God said, 'Let us.'" And that is the meaning of the stages man passes through in his life. He must go from rung to rung, until through him, everything is united in the highest world. And that is why it is written, "And these are their stages at their goings forth. The stages of man shall take him to where he has come from." The venture of prayer. Someone asked Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin to promise to visit him the next day. "How can you ask me to make such a promise?" said the Tzadik. "This evening I must pray and recite, 'Hear, O Israel.' While I say these words, my soul goes out to the utmost rim of life. Then comes the darkness of sleep. And when it is day, the great morning prayer is a pacing through all worlds. And finally, when I fall on my face, my soul leans over the rim of life. Perhaps I shall not die this time either. But how can I now promise to do something at a time after the prayer?" The piece of sugar. It is told, when Rabbi Shlomo drank tea or coffee, it was his custom to take a piece of sugar and hold it in his hand the entire time he was drinking. Once, his son asked him, "Father, why do you do that? If you need sugar, put it in your mouth. But if you do not need it, why hold it in your hand?" When he had emptied his cup, the rabbi gave the piece of sugar he had been holding to his son and said, "Taste it." The son put it in his mouth and was very much astonished, for there was no sweetness at all left in it. Later, when the son told this story, he said, "A man in whom everything is unified can taste with his hand as if with his tongue." It struck us. With the sword at his throat, Rabbi Shlomo was on a journey in the company of one of his disciples. On the way, they stopped at an inn and sat down at a table. Then the rabbi gave orders to warm mead for him, for he liked his mead warm. In the meantime, soldiers arrived, and when they saw Jews sitting at the table, they told them to get up in loud, angry tones. "Is the mead warm yet?" the rabbi asked the man who served drinks. At that, the soldiers struck the table with their fists and shouted, "Off with you, or else!" The rabbi only said, "Isn't it warm yet?" The leader of the soldiers drew his sword from the scabbard and put the blade to the Maggid's throat, because, it mustn't get really hot, said Rabbi Shlomo. Then the soldiers left the inn. Without ecstasy. Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin said, "When he, who has done all the commandments of the Torah, but has not felt the blaze of holy ecstasy in so doing, comes to that other world, they open the gates of paradise for him. But because he has not felt the blaze of ecstasy in this world, he does not feel the ecstasy of paradise. Now, if he is a fool, and complains and grumbles, and they make so much to do about paradise, he is instantly thrown out. But if he is wise, he leaves of his own accord and goes to the Tzadik, and he teaches the poor soul how to feel ecstasy. A little light. When can one see a little light? Asked Rabbi Shlomo, and answered his own question. If one keeps oneself quite lowly, as it is written, "If I make my bed in the netherworld, behold, thou art there." Climbing down. Rabbi Shlomo said, "If you want to raise a man from mud and filth, do not think it is enough to keep standing on top and reaching down to him a helping hand. You must go all the way down yourself, down into mud and filth. Then take hold of him with strong hands and pull him and yourself out into the light." To open. Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin said to someone, "I have no key to open you." And the man cried out, "Then pry me open with a nail." From this time on, the rabbi always said words of warm praise about him. The cure. A grandson of Rabbi Shlomo told, "To a Tzadik came a man whose soul had become enmeshed in a tangle of oppressive impulses, which defy writing down. 'I cannot help you,' said the Tzadik. 'You must go to Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin.' So he came to my grandfather, and arrived just at the hour he was lighting the Hanukkah candles and reciting psalms the while. For this was his way. The man stopped and listened. My grandfather went on speaking without looking around. But when he came to the words, 'and hath delivered us from our oppressors,' he turned to his guest, patted him on the shoulder, and asked, 'Do you believe that God can wrest us from all oppression?' 'I believe,' said the man. From that hour on, all his disturbing impulses left him. The disciple speaks. Rabbi Asher of Stolin said about his teacher, Rabbi Shlomo, "Whenever he prays, the rabbi stands with one foot over here and the other over there, and it is the foot over there on which he rests. And everything only in spirit, as it is written, 'And thy footsteps were not known.'" That once he entered Rabbi Shlomo's room and said to him, "Rabbi, your footsteps are not known. What makes you follow me all the time?" The rabbi retorted, "Come, and I shall tell you when you may and when you may not." But the disciple reflected, "Once he has told me, I shall not be able to transgress, so I'd rather not hear it." Showing and concealing. Rabbi Asher of Stolin, a disciple of Rabbi Shlomo's, said concerning the Hasidim of his time, "They are peasants of clay and Cossacks of straw. When they come to the rabbi, they show him what is good, and what is bad they conceal from him. Now, when I came to my sweet, holy, darling rabbi, and while he said this, he kissed his fingertips, I concealed the good from him, but I showed him what was bad. For it is written that the priest shall look on the plague." Into the inn. Rabbi Shlomo asked his disciple Rabbi Asher, "When did you come to prayer?" "At just the right time, for the inn named Exult, O ye righteous," was his reply. "Well done," said the Tzadik. "If you drive, you drive. And if you stop, you look around to see if anything is wrong. For if you stop midway, it is easy to fall behind." Origin. This is what Rabbi Uri told about his teacher, Rabbi Shlomo. "I had been with him a long time, and still he had not asked me my mother's name, as it is the custom to do. Once I mustered my courage and asked him about this. He answered, 'Ox, lion, eagle, man, and nothing further.' I did not dare beg him to expound his words. Only after many years did I come to understand that the great Tzadikim, the healers of souls, want to know in which of the four carriers of the throne chariot of God the soul had its origin, and not in what earthly womb it received its body, its side." Beyond music. One day, musicians played for Rabbi Uri of Strelisk, known as the Seraph. Later, he said to his Hasidim, "They say that music unites the three principles: life, intellect, and soul. But the musicians of today base their playing only on the principle of life. After a while, he continued, "Of all the halls of heaven, the hall of music is the lowest and the smallest. But he who wants to approach God has only to enter this hall." My teacher, Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, had no need of this. Abel and Cain. Rabbi Uri said, "My teacher, Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, had the soul of Abel. Now, there are people within whom the good traits of Cain's soul have their habitation, and these are very great." Leftovers. Rabbi Shlomo and his disciple Rabbi Mordecai of Lechevitz once traveled cross-country. It was toward the end of the period in which the blessing of the new moon can be spoken, and since the shining sickle had broken from the clouds which had been veiling it, they appeared for the sacred rite. But the coachman anticipated them. The moment he saw the moon, he wiped his hands on the rim of the wheel and mumbled the benediction. Rabbi Mordecai laughed, but his teacher reproved him. A king, so he told him, once gave order to collect all the leftovers of the meal eaten in his army and store them in a certain place. No one knew the reason for this command, but presently the country was at war. The king's army was surrounded by the enemy and cut off from outside provisions. Then the king fed his army on the leftovers, which the enemy laughingly let pass. The army kept up its strength and was victorious. Out of travail. Once, at the close of the Day of Atonement, when Rabbi Shlomo was in a gay mood, he said he would tell everyone what he had asked of heaven on these holy days and what answer was intended for his request. To the first of his disciples who wanted to be told, he said, "What you asked of God was that he should give you your livelihood at the proper time and without travail, so that you might not be hindered in serving him. And the answer was that what God really wants of you is not study or prayer, but the size of your heart, which is breaking because the travail of gaining a livelihood hinders you in the service of God." What was learned? Rabbi Shlomo said to his disciples, "After death, when a man reaches the world of truth, they ask him, 'Who was your teacher?' And when he has told them the name of his teacher, they ask, 'What did you learn from him?' This is what is meant by the words we read in Midrash. At some future time, each one will stand and say what he has learned." One of the disciples cried, "I have already prepared what I shall say in your name." It is, "May God give us a pure heart and pure thinking, and from our thinking may purity spread through all of our being, so that in us the word may be fulfilled. Before they call, I will answer." The dowry. Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin could not bear to have money in his purse or laid away in the table drawer. It weighed on his heart until he had given it to someone who was in need. On a certain day, he betrothed his son to the daughter of Rabbi Baruch of Mezritch, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Baruch was fervent, devout, and wise, but at the same time concerned with receiving his due. When the date given in the engagement contract for the payment of the dowry had elapsed, and the money had not been paid, he wrote to Rabbi Shlomo that he would return the contract and annul the engagement. The Rabbi of Karlin asked him to set another date, and sent 2 of his followers to travel through the country and collect the amount of the dowry among the Hasidim. But when the sum was in Rabbi Shlomo's hands, and poor people stood in the court of his house, he could not endure the thought that out there were the needy, while money was here in his possession. He went into the court and distributed everything he had. Again, Rabbi Baruch sent him a stern letter. The Rabbi of Karlin replied that they should go ahead with preparations for the wedding, that he himself would bring the dowry. Again he sent 2 men to collect the necessary amount, and again they brought it back with them. But this time they were cautious and did not give it to the rabbi until he was seated in the carriage beside his son. The route took them to a city in which Rabbi Nahum of Chernobyl was imprisoned as the result of a denunciation, such as the opponents of Hasidim frequently indulged in. The Rabbi of Karlin succeeded in getting the permission of the authorities to see his friend for a short time. When they stood face to face, Rabbi Shlomo at once saw that Rabbi Nahum had taken sorrow upon himself for the sake of Israel. And Rabbi Nahum at once saw what was going on in him. "How do you know?" he asked. "For I begged God that neither angel nor seraph might know." "An angel or a seraph does not know," said the rabbi of Karlin. "But Shlomo, son of Utah, knows. But I promise you that when my turn comes, no creature shall know." Now, this was the day just before the rabbi of Chernobyl was to leave the jail. When the rabbi of Karlin had taken leave of him, he went to the official in charge of the prison, gave him the 400 rubles, which constituted the dowry, and thus had his friend released a day sooner. Then he drove on to the wedding with his son. There are various versions of what happened after this. According to one of them, Rabbi Baruch never mentioned the dowry during the 7 days of the celebration. When the rabbi of Karlin was ready to leave for home, his son said to him, "You are going home, and I am staying behind with my father-in-law. What shall I do if he asks me for the dowry?" "Should he ever worry you about it," Rabbi Shlomo replied, "stand somewhere or other with your face to the wall and say, 'Father, Father, my father-in-law is worrying me about the dowry.' Then he will stop asking you for it." Some time passed and nothing happened until one Friday evening when Rabbi Baruch recited the Song of Songs and his son-in-law stood opposite him. When Rabbi Baruch came to the words, "a bundle of myrrh," he paused and lightly touched his left hand with his right, as if he were counting a bundle of bills. Then he continued with the Song of Songs. But his son-in-law could not bear to remain. He rushed into his room, turned his face to the wall, and said, "Father, Father, my father-in-law is worrying me about the dowry." From that moment on, he was left in peace. The worst. Rabbi Shlomo asked, "What is the worst thing the evil urge can achieve?" And he answered, "To make man forget that he is the son of a king." How God loves. Rabbi Shlomo said, "If only I could love the greatest Tzadik as much as God loves the greatest ne'er-do-well." A hand's breadth higher. When Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin was in the little town of Dobromysl near Lozhny, where his former companion, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, was living at that time, and stopped in the house of study, Rabbi Zalman said on a Friday to some Hasidim who had come to him, "Now I am not the rabbi. The holy Tzadik, our master Rabbi Shlomo, is within my district, so now he is the rabbi. You must go to Dobromysl and stay with him over the Sabbath." They did so, and ate the 3 Sabbath meals at the table of the rabbi of Karlin. And though he spoke no word of teaching, as their own teacher did on these occasions, their spirit beheld the holy light, and it was incomparably more radiant than ever before. At the 3rd Sabbath meal, Rabbi Shlomo preceded the saying of grace by the brief psalm which begins with, "His foundation is in the holy mountains," and ends, "All my springs are in thee," which he translated, "All my springing is in thee." And instantly the springs of their spirit gushed forth. The Spirit possessed them so utterly that until long after the Sabbath, they did not know the difference between day and night. When they returned to Rabbi Zalman and told him what had happened to them, he said, "Yes, who can compare to the holy Rabbi Shlomo? He knows how to translate? We cannot translate. Who can compare to the holy Rabbi Shlomo? For he is a hand's breadth above the world." Armilus. Rabbi Shlomo used to say, "If only the Messiah, the son of David, would come. At a pinch, I myself can be the Messiah, son of Joseph, who precedes him and is killed. What is there to fear from me? And whom shall I fear? Shall I fear the crooked Cossack?" The people thought he was calling death a crooked Cossack, and were very much surprised at this. Again and again, the community of Ludmir asked him to come to them, for many of his friends lived there. He always refused. But when envoys from Ludmir came to him once more, it was on Lag BaOmer, on the 33rd day of the days of the counting of Omer, between the feasts of Passover and the Revelation. He asked them smilingly, "And what do you do in Ludmir on Lag BaOmer?" "Well," said the envoys, just what is usually done. All the boys, big and the little, go out into the fields with their bows and shoot. The rabbi laughed and said, "Well, if that's the way it is, if you shoot, that makes all the difference. Then I will come to you." When the rabbi was already living in Ludmir, the Russians put down a revolt of the Poles in that region and pursued the defeated rebels right into the town. The Russian commander gave his men permission to loot at will for 2 hours. It was the day before the Feast of the Revelation, which, in that year, fell on a Sabbath. The Jews were gathered in the house of prayer. Rabbi Shlomo was praying, and in such ecstasy that he heard and saw nothing that went on around him. Just then, a tall Cossack came limping along, went up to the window, looked in, and pointed his gun. In a ringing voice, the rabbi was saying the words, "For thine, O Lord, is the kingdom," when his little grandson, who was standing beside him, timidly tugged at his coat, and he awoke from his ecstasy. But the bullet had already struck him in the side. "Why did you fetch me down?" he asked. When they brought him to his house and laid him down, he had them open the Book of Splendor at a certain passage and prop it up in front of him while they bound up his wound. It stayed there, open before his eyes until the following Wednesday, when he died. Now, it is said that the name of that limping Cossack was Armilus, and that is the name of the fiend who, according to the old tradition, is to kill the Messiah, son of Joseph. The rope that gave. A few days before he died of his wound, Rabbi Shlomo wrote to his disciple Mordecai of Lekovitz, "Come, so that I may consecrate you to leadership." Mordecai at once set out on his journey. On the way, he suddenly felt as if a rope which was carrying him safely across an abyss gave as if he were falling through shoreless space. "I have been severed from my teacher," he screamed, and after that did not utter another word. His companions took him to the old rabbi of Neskish, known as a wonder worker throughout the land, and asked him to heal Rabbi Mordecai, who was quite out of his mind. "Tell him," said the rabbi of Neskish, "that his teacher is dead. Then he will recover." They conveyed this news to him very cautiously, for they feared he might do harm to himself. But the moment he grasped their message, his face regained its composure. In a firm voice, he pronounced the benediction which is said at the news of death, and cried, "He was my teacher, and he shall remain my teacher." In needy self. Out of mercy. Rabbi Asher of Stolin told, "My teacher, Rabbi Shlomo, used to say, 'I have to prepare what I shall have to do in hell,' for he was certain that no better end was in store for him. Now, when his soul ascended after death, and the serving angels received him joyfully, to guide him to the highest paradise, he refused to go with them. 'They are making fun of me,' he said. 'This cannot be the world of truth.' At last, the divine presence herself said to him, 'Come, my son. Out of mercy, I shall give you of my treasure.' Then he gave in and was content. I am prayer. It is told, a complaint was once lodged in the tribunal of heaven. It was that most Jews prayed without fixing their souls on prayer. And because this was so, a king was allowed to arise on earth who wanted to prohibit the Jews in his realm from praying together in a congregation. But some angels objected and would not permit this to happen. Finally, they decided to ask the souls of the Tzadikim who dwell in the upper world, and they gave their consent to the prohibition. But when they came to Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, he shook the world with the storm of his prayer and said, "I am prayer. I take it on myself to pray in lieu of all Israel," and the prohibition did not go through. Israel of Koznitz. The story of the Cape. A woman came to Rabbi Israel, the Maggid of Koznitz, and told him, with many tears, that she had been married 12 years and still had not borne a son. "What are you willing to do about it?" he asked her. She did not know what to say. "My mother," so the Maggid told her, "was aging and still had no child." Then she heard that the holy Baal Shem was stopping over in Apt in the course of a journey. She hurried to his inn and begged him to pray she might bear a son. "What are you willing to do about it?" he asked. "My husband is a poor bookbinder," she replied. "But I do have one fine thing that I shall give to the rabbi." She went home as fast as she could and fetched her good cape, her katinka, which was carefully stowed away in a chest. But when she returned to the inn with it, she heard that the Baal Shem had already left for Mezritch. She immediately set out after him, and since she had no money to ride, she walked from town to town with her katinka until she came to Mezritch. The Baal Shem took the cape and hung it on the wall. "It is well," he said. "My mother walked all the way back, from town to town, until she reached apartment. A year later, I was born." "I too," cried the woman, "will bring you a good cape of mine so that I may get a son." "That won't work," said the Maggid. "You heard the story. My mother had no story to go by." Studying. When Israel was 7 years old, he studied in the Talmud school by day, but in the evening he went to the house of study and studied on his own. The first night of Hanukkah, his father did not permit him to go to the house of study, for he suspected him of wanting to play a certain game, popular at this season, with the other boys. But since he had neither a book nor a candle at home, he promised his father to stay in the house of study only as long as it took a 3-penny candle to burn down. Now, either other candles were burning in the room, or the angels, who rejoiced in the studying of the boy, kept the 3-penny candle miraculously alight at any rate. The boy remained in the house of study long after he was supposed to. When he finally came home, his father beat him until the blood came. "And did you not tell your father that you were studying all that time?" they asked the Maggid when he told the story many years after. "I might have told him, of course," he answered, "and my father would have believed me, for he knew that I never lied. But is it right to use the greatness of the Torah to save one's own skin?" Knowledge. They say that, in his youth, Rabbi Israel studied 800 books of the Kabbalah, but the first time he saw the Maggid of Mezritch face to face, he instantly knew that he knew nothing at all. His Torah. The Maggid of Mezritch said, "Our sages very properly emphasize that in the first psalm, the Torah is called the law of the Lord, and later, his Torah. For if a man learns the Torah for its own sake, then it is given to him, and it is his, and he may clothe all his holy thoughts in the holy Torah." The sheepskin coat. It is told, when he was young, Rabbi Israel was poor and in need. Once he went to visit Rabbi Yitzchak, later the Rav of Berdichev, who was then still living in Zelikov, a nearby town. Later the Tzadik saw him out. First they stood on the threshold of the house and kept on talking, and they conversed so earnestly that they walked on and on together. It was bitterly cold, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak had not taken his coat. "Lend me your sheepskin for a while," he said to his disciple and friend, and he gladly gave it to him. Freezing in his thin clothing, he walked beside the Tzadik, and they never stopped talking. This went on for some time. "Now it is enough, Israel," the rabbi finally said. "Now you shall be warm too." From that hour on, Israel's destiny altered. Sickness and strength. Rabbi Israel was in poor health from childhood on. He was as lean as a stick, and the doctors were surprised that he stayed alive. For the most part, he lay on his bed wrapped in rabbit skins. When he rose, he put on slippers lined with bear's fur, because he could not stand shoes on his feet. They carried him to the house of prayer in a litter. But the moment he had said on the threshold, "How full of awe is this place!" he was transformed. On Mondays and Thursdays, the days on which the scriptures are read, he walked in prayer, shawl, and phylacteries, the scroll of the Torah in his arms, so lightly and quickly through the 2 rows of waiting people that the servants who accompanied him carrying the candles could hardly keep up with him. With dancing motion, he leaned toward the holy ark into which he put the scroll, walked with dancing step to the desk on which the candelabrum stood, and set the candles in it. Then, in his ordinary low voice, he said the first words of the prayer, but from one word to the next his voice gained in power, until he swept upward with it every heart. After prayer, When the servants carried him home in his litter, he was pale as one dying, but his pallor was luminous. That was why they said that his body shone like 1,000 souls. Once, when he had been asked to attend a circumcision and was about to get into the carriage, some people came forward to help him in. "Fools," he said, "why should I need your strength? It is written, 'But they that wait for the Lord shall change their strength.' I shall change my strength for the strength of God. He has strength to spare." And he jumped into the carriage. The coat. Whatever the rabbi of Koznitz said sounded as if he were praying, only weaker and in a lower voice. He liked to hum to himself proverbs and sayings current among the Polish peasants. After a Purim feast, which he had presided over in great happiness, he said, "How right! What the people say, doff your coat, dear soul, and prance merrily at feast and dance." But how curious a coat is the body. Sometimes he even spoke to God in Polish. When he was alone, they would hear him say, "Moj kochanku," which means, "My darling." A prayer. The rabbi of Koznitz said to God, "Lord of the world, I beg of you to redeem Israel, and if you do not want to do that, then redeem the Goyim." Another prayer. Once, the Maggid of Koznitz said, "Lord, I stand before you like a messenger boy and wait for you to tell me where to go." Testimony. This is what Rabbi Moshe of Koznitz, son of the Maggid, writes in his book, The Well of Moses. "My father and teacher said to me, 'Believe me, my son, the alien thoughts which seized on me from time to time came only while I was praying, and with the help of God, I brought them all home to their source and their root, to where their tent stood in the beginning of time, its Stow Broads." Dead and living prayers. Once Rabbi Israel heard the "Cursed be" passage in the scriptures read in the house of prayer, and cried out at the words, "And thy carcasses shall be food unto all fowls of the air." Later at the meal, he said, "The prayers which are said without fear and without love are called the carcasses. But he who hears the praying of every mouth has mercy upon his creatures. From above he pours awakening into the heart of man, so that one single time he can pray with his soul as he should, and then his prayer grows great and destroys the prayers which are carcasses and mounts like a bird to the floodgates of heaven." Music. The Maggid of Koznitz said, "Make sweet melody," is what Isaiah said to Tyre, the harlot long forgotten. "Make sweet your way, and you shall be given melody." Every day. The Maggid of Koznitz said, "Every day man shall go forth out of Egypt, out of distress." For his sick son, when his beloved little son fell ill, and the doctors had given up hope, the Maggid of Koznitz sat up all night and could think of nothing but his great grief. But when the time for the morning prayer had come, he said, "It is written, 'And she cast the child under one of the shrubs,' the shrubs, the shrubs, the great shrub of prayer, so that one word of the prayer might be said with rejoicing." When Rabbi Levi Yitzhak, who at that time was still living in the neighboring town of Zelikov, heard of it, he went to the bath and dipped under with the holy intent of changing the Maggid's trend of thought, so that he might pray for the recovery of his son. And he succeeded. While the Maggid was praying, the trend of his thoughts was changed, and with great fervor he implored God to let his child recover. At that time, so the Hasidim say, not only little Moshe, the Maggid's son, but all the sick children, far and wide, recovered. Black fire. Each year, the Maggid of Koznitz visited his father's grave in the city of Apartment. On one such occasion, the heads of the community came to him to ask him to preach in the great house of prayer on the Sabbath, as he had done the year before. "Is there any reason to believe," he said, "that I accomplished anything with my last year's sermon?" The men left in dismay, and the entire community was stricken with grief. A crowd collected in front of the Maggid's inn, All stood silent with bowed heads. But then, a man, a craftsman, came forward, went into the Maggid's room, and said to him, "You claim that you did not accomplish anything with the sermon you preached last year. You did accomplish something as far as I am concerned. For at that time, I heard from your lips the words that every son of Israel must do as it says in the Scriptures. I have set the Lord always before me. Ever since then, I see the name of the Lord before me, like black fire on white fire. If that is the case," said the Maggid, "I shall go and preach a sermon." Self-mortification. To the Maggid of Mezritch came a man who, in order to mortify himself, wore nothing but a sack on his bare body, and fasted from one Sabbath to the next. The Maggid said to him, "Do you think the evil urge is keeping away from you? It is tricking you into that sack. He who pretends to fast from Sabbath to Sabbath, but secretly eats a little something every day, is spiritually better off than you, for he is only deceiving others, while you are deceiving yourself." Rejection. A woman came to the Maggid of Mezritch and told him, weeping bitterly all the while, that her husband had turned from her and said she was ugly. "And perhaps you are really ugly?" said Rabbi Israel. "Rabbi," cried the woman, "did I not seem beautiful and dear to him when we stood under the wedding canopy? Why have I now grown black?" Then a tremor went through the rabbi, and it was only with difficulty that he could bring himself to comfort the woman, saying he would pray that God might turn her husband's heart back to her. When she had gone, he said to God, "Think of this woman, Lord of the world, and think of Israel. When the people of Israel said at Sinai, 'All that the Lord hath spoken will we do,' and you chose them and wedded them to yourself, were they not beautiful and dear? Why have they now grown black?" Rich people's food. A rich man once came to the Maggid of Mezritch. "What are you in the habit of eating?" the Maggid asked. "I am modest in my demands," the rich man replied. "Bread and salt and a drink of water are all I need." "What are you thinking of?" the rabbi reproved him. "You must eat roast meat and drink mead, like all rich people." And he did not let the man go until he had promised to do as he said. Later the Hasidim asked him the reason for this odd request. "Not until he eats meat," said the Maggid, "will he realize that the poor man needs bread. As long as he himself eats bread, he will think the poor man can live on stones." In order. It is told, a villager and his wife came to the Maggid of Mezritch and begged him to pray that they might have a son, for they were childless. "Give me 52 gulden," said the Maggid, "for this is the numerical value of the word ben, son." "We should be glad to give you 10 gulden," said the man, but the Maggid refused to accept them. Then the man went to the marketplace and staggered back under a sack of copper coins. He spread them out on the table. There were 20 gulden. "Look, what a lot of money," he cried. But the Maggid would not come down with his demand. At that, the villager grew angry, gathered up his money, and said to his wife, "Come on, let's go. God will help us without the Maggid's prayer." "You have already been granted his help," said the rabbi, and he was right. The test. It is told, when Prince Adam Czartoryski, the friend and counselor of Tsar Alexander, had been married for many years and still had no children, he went to the Maggid of Mezritch and asked him to pray for him. And because of his prayer, the princess bore a son. At the baptism, the father told of the Maggid's intercession with God. His brother, who, with his young son, was among the guests, made fun of what he called the prince's superstition. "Let us go to your wonder worker together," he said, "and I shall show you that he can't tell the difference between left and right." Together they journeyed to Mezritch, which was close to where they lived. "I beg of you," Adam's brother said to the Maggid, "to pray for my sick son. It's not Tana." The Maggid bowed his head in silence. "Will you do this for me?" the other urged. The Maggid raised his head. "Go," he said, and Adam saw that he only managed to speak with a great effort. "Go quickly, and perhaps you will still see him alive." "Well, what did I tell you?" Adam's brother said laughingly as they got into their carriage. Adam was silent during the ride. When they drove into the court of his house, they found the boy dead. The pudding. Once, a simple man of the people came to the Maggid of Mezritch with his wife and said that he wished to divorce her. "Why do you want to do that?" asked the Maggid. "I work very hard all week," said the man, "and on the Sabbath I want to have some pleasure. Now at the Sabbath meal, my wife first serves the fish, and then the onions, and the heavy main dish, and by the time she puts the pudding on the table, I have eaten all I want and have no appetite for it. All week I work for this pudding, and when it comes I cannot even taste of it, and all my labor was for nothing. Time after time, I have asked my wife to put the pudding on the table right after the benediction over the wine, but no, she says that the way she does it is according to the custom." The Maggid turned to the woman. "From now on," he said, "make 2 puddings. Serve the one right after the benediction over the wine, and the other after the main dish, as before." Both husband and wife agreed to this, and went away well pleased. On the same day, the Maggid said to his wife, "From now on, make 2 puddings on Friday. Serve one right after the benediction over the wine, and the other after the main dish, as you have been doing." From that time on, this was the custom in the Maggid's house, and continued to be the custom among his children and his children's children. 1 pudding was served immediately after the blessing over the wine, and this was called the Peace at Home pudding. Adam's share. It is told that once, when the Maggid of Mezritch was praying, Adam, the first man, came to him and said, "You have atoned for your share in my sin. Now won't you atone for my share in it too?" The Cantonist at the Seder. It is told, in the Russia of those days, it was common to draft Jewish boys into the army, in which they were forced to serve to their 60th year. They were known as cantonists. On the eve of Passover, a man whose uniform identified him as a cantonist arrived in Mezritch and asked to be admitted to the Holy Maggid. When he stood in his presence, he begged to be allowed to participate in the Seder, and the Maggid gave his permission. When, in the course of the rites of the Seder, they came to the words, "The ceremony of the Passover has been celebrated in due order," the guest asked whether he might sing, and his request was granted. After the closing words of the song, "Peduyim lezion berina," which means, "Redeemed unto Zion with joy," he cried out in Russian, "Podjom," that is, "Let's go." The Maggid rose and said in a voice filled with jubilation, "We are ready to go to Zion." But the guest had vanished. The man who struck the prophet. A grandson of the Maggid of Mezritch told, "Once a man who was possessed came to the Holy Maggid, may his memory protect us, and asked to be redeemed. The Maggid called on the spirit to confess his sins. The spirit said, 'When the prophet Zechariah predicted destruction to the people, I was the first to run forward from the throng and strike him in the face. Only then did the others shower blows upon him until they struck him dead. Ever since that time, I am forced to wander from soul to soul and can find no rest.' But when the Holy Maggid began his work of redemption by rubbing the fringes one against the other, the spirit burst into insolent laughter and cried, 'In my day, it was the tailors and the shoemakers who knew how to do this sort of thing.' And if you were so clever," said the Maggid, "why did you strike the prophet dead?" Then the spirit replied, "It is a law that he who keeps his prophecy to himself incurs the death penalty. On the other hand, it is said that if the prophet does not utter his prophecy, it becomes invalid. So it would have been better if Zechariah had kept his prophecy to himself and thus sacrificed himself for the community. That is why we killed him." The Holy Maggid said, "To tell this, that is the reason why you came here, and completed the work of redemption." That is how the grandson of the Maggid of Mezritch told the story. But it is also told that when the Maggid heard the words of the Spirit, he could not complete his work, and that the man who was possessed had to go to Rabbi Issachar Ber of Radoshitz, the wonder worker, who in his youth had been a disciple of the Maggids, and that he performed the work of redemption. his sister's spirit. It is told, the Maggid of Mezritch had a sister who died young, but in the upper world, they gave her permission to remain in her brother's house. The Maggid always saw to it that clothing was made for poor orphans. When dealers brought him the material for this, he said, "I shall ask my sister whether this stuff is durable and a good buy," and she always gave him correct information. She watched everything the servants did, and when one or another of them stole a loaf of bread or a piece of meat, she instantly reported the theft to her brother. He detested this tale-bearing, but he could not break her of it. Once his temper grew short, and he said to her, "Wouldn't you like to take a little rest?" From that time on, she was gone. The soul of the symbolist. It is told, once, on a midnight, a voice drifted into the room of the Maggid of Mezritch and moaned, "Holy man of Israel, have pity on a poor soul, which for 10 years has been wandering from eddy to eddy." "Who are you?" asked the Maggid. "And what did you do while you were on earth?" "I was a musician," said the voice. "I played the cymbal, and I sinned, like all wandering musicians." "And who sent you to me?" Then the voice groaned, "Why, I played at your wedding, Rabbi, and you gave me praise and wanted to hear more. And so I played one piece after another, and you were well pleased. Do you still remember the tune you played when they conducted me under the wedding baldachin?" The voice hummed the tune. "Well then, you shall be redeemed on the coming Sabbath," said the Maggid. On the Friday evening after that, when the Maggid stood in front of the reader's desk, he sang the song, "Come, my friend, to meet the bride," in a tune no one knew, and not even the choir could join in. The world of melody. The Yehudi, the Tzadik of Bezisha, once saw with the eyes of his mind that the Maggid of Mezritch, who had fallen ill, was now in danger of dying. Immediately he told 2 of his faithful men, who were excellent singers and players, to go to Mezritch and gladden Rabbi Israel's heart with music. The 2 set out at once, reached the Maggid's house on Friday, and were told to welcome in the Sabbath with their singing and playing. When the sounds entered the room where Rabbi Israel lay, he listened intently, and his face brightened. Gradually, his breath grew even, his forehead cool, and his hands stopped twitching and lay quietly on the coverlet. When the music ended, he looked up as though he had just awakened and said, "The Yehudi saw that I had passed through all the worlds. The only world in which I was not was the world of melody. So he sent 2 messengers to lead me back through that world." The melody of angels. Rumor had it that the melody the Maggid of Mezritch left behind was one he had heard from the lips of angels who sang it in honor of God. But one of his disciples said this was not so, that the angels had heard it from his lips. In later years, when a son of that disciple told the story, he added, "They were the angels who were born from the deeds of the holy Maggid." With one look. One Sabbath, at the 3rd meal, young Zevi Elimelech heard his teacher, Rabbi Mendel of Rymanov, say, "He who lives in the era of the Maggid of Mezritch and has not looked upon his face will not be found worthy to look upon the face of the Messiah when he comes." It is there. The moment the light was put on the table, Zevi Elimelech took leave of the rabbi, fetched his stick, slung his knapsack over his shoulder, and walked day and night with scarcely any respite, for who knows if the Messiah will not come this very week. When he reached Mezritch, he went straight to the Maggid's house of study, without even stopping to leave his stick and knapsack at an inn, for who knows if the Messiah will not come this very hour. They showed him into a little room where many people were standing around the Maggid's bed. Zevi Elimelech leaned against the wall, rested one hand on his stick, the other on a man in front of him, hoisted himself up, and looked into the Maggid's face. With one look, he said to himself, one can gain the coming world. Extension. In his old age, Rabbi Israel said, "There are those Tzadikim who, as soon as they have accomplished the task appointed to them for their life on earth, are called to depart. And there are those Tzadikim who, the moment they have accomplished the task appointed to them for their life on earth, are given another task, and they live until that too is accomplished. That is the way it was with me." Pebbles. In the year of Napoleon's Russian campaign, the rabbi of Apt visited the Maggid of Mezritch on the Feast of the Revelation. He found him lying on his sickbed as usual, but saw that his face was quickened with a strange expression of decision. "How are you?" asked the visitor. "I am a soldier now," said the Maggid. The 5 pebbles young David picked up for his sling. "To fight Goliath, the Philistine. Those 5 pebbles I have, right here in my bed." In the night before the first holiday, 2 hours after midnight, the Maggid went to the desk in the house of prayer, stood there until morning, said the morning prayer, read the scriptures, recited the liturgy for the feast, and finished his prayer 3 hours after 12 o'clock noon. Before the end, when the Maggid of Mezritch, who was sick unto death, prayed in front of the ark, the month before he died, on the eve of the Day of Atonement, he paused before saying the words, "The Lord said, I have pardoned," and said to God, "Lord of the world, you alone know how great your power is, and you alone know how great is the weakness of my body. And this too you know, that all through this month, day after day, I have prayed in front of the ark, not for my own sake, but for the sake of this, your people of Israel. And so I ask you, if it grew easy for me to take the yoke of your people upon myself, and to perform the service with my wretched body, how can it be difficult for you, who are all-powerful, to say 3 words? Then he bade them sing a song of joy, and called out in a strong voice, "The Lord said, I have pardoned." Jacob Yitzhak of Lublin, the seer. His old teacher. Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak once journeyed to a distant city in the company of some of his friends and disciples. It was Friday afternoon, and they must have been quite close to their destination when they came to a crossroads. The coachman asked which road he was to take. The rabbi did not know, and so he said, "Give the horses their head, and let them go where they want." After a time they saw the houses of a town. Soon, however, they discovered that it was not the one they were bound for. "Well, after that, better not call me rabbi anymore," said the seer of Lublin. "But how are we going to get food and shelter for the Sabbath?" his disciples asked, "if we are not allowed to say who you are?" Now the reason for this question was this: the Tzadik never kept overnight even the smallest coins of the gifts of money he had received during the day, but gave everything to the poor. "Let us go to the house of prayer," he said. "There some burgher or other will take each of us home with him as his Sabbath guest." And that was what happened. Only that the rabbi himself took so long over his prayers that the house of prayer was all but empty when he had done. Looking up, he saw that one man alone, a man of 80 or thereabouts, was still there. This old man asked the stranger, "Where are you going for the consecration of the Sabbath?" "I don't know," said the Tzadik. "Just go to the inn," said the old man. "And when the day of rest is over, I'll take up a collection to settle your bill." "I cannot keep the Sabbath at the inn," said Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak, "because there they do not say the blessing over the lights." The old man hesitated. Then he said, "In my house, I have only a little bread and wine for my wife and myself." "I am not a big eater," the rabbi of Lublin assured him, and they went off together. First the old man said the blessing over the wine, and then the rabbi. After the blessing over the bread, the old man asked, "Where do you come from?" "From Lublin." "And do you know him?" "I am always in his company." Then the old man begged his guest in a voice that trembled, "Tell me something about him. Why are you so eager to know?" "When I was young," said the old man, "I was an assistant at the school, and he was one of the children assigned to my care. He did not seem especially gifted, but then I heard that he became a very great man. Since that time I fast 1 day every week, that I may be found worthy to see him. For I am too poor to ride to Lublin, and too weak to walk there." End quote. "Do you remember anything at all about him?" the rabbi inquired. "Day after day," said the old man. "I had to look for him when the time to study the prayer book had come, and I never found him. After a fairly long time he came of his own accord, and then I smacked him. Once I watched where he was going and followed. There he sat on an anthill in the woods and cried aloud, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." After that, I never smacked him anymore. Now Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak knew why his horses had taken him to this town. "I am he," he said. When the old man heard this, he fainted, and it took a long time to revive him. At the end of the Sabbath, the Tzadik left the city with his disciples, and the old man accompanied him until he grew tired and had to turn back. He reached home, lay down, and died. While this was happening, the rabbi and his companions were having the post-Sabbath meal at a village inn. When they had finished eating, he rose and said, "Now let us return to the city and bury my old teacher." Tears that consecrate. In the course of his long wanderings, Rabbi Zusia came to the town where the father of the boy Jacob Yitzhak lived. In the house of study, he went back of the stove to pray, for this was his way, and covered his whole head with the prayer shawl. Suddenly he half turned, looked out from it, and without letting his glance rest on anything else, looked the boy Jacob Yitzhak straight in the eyes. Then he turned back to the stove and went on praying. The boy was seized with an irresistible impulse to cry. A well of tears opened up within him, and he wept for an hour. Not until his tears ceased to fall did Zusia go up to him. Then he said, "Your soul has been wakened. Now go to my teacher, the Maggid of Mezritch, and study with him, so that your mind may also be roused from its sleep." In the house of study, a Tzadik told, "When I lived in Nikolsburg as a disciple of Rabbi Shmelka, one of my companions was a young man by the name of Jacob Yitzhak. Years later, he became the rabbi of Lublin. He and I had both been married for 2 years. In the house of study, he sat in an inconspicuous place. He never asked questions like the rest. He never looked at any of us, but only at the rabbi. When he was not looking at him, he kept his eyes on the ground, but his face was transfigured with a golden radiance from within, and I saw that the rabbi was very fond of him." Holy joy. When Jacob Yitzhak was in Rabbi Shmelka's house of study, he seemed like an angel remote from all matters of earth. So much so that Rabbi Shmelka, who himself had a tendency to aloofness, found his disciple's attitude excessive. He sent him to Hanapol with a note to Rabbi Zusha, which contained only these words, "Make our Itzakel a little lighter of heart." And Rabbi Zusha, who had once wakened Jacob Yitzhak the boy to holy tears, now succeeded in waking holy joy within him. At the brink, near the city of Lizensk, where Rabbi Elimelech taught, there is a hill. It is wooded on all sides except one, but there it is, steep and stony, and the rocky peak is called Rabbi Melech's Table to this very day. Young Jacob Yitzhak was in the habit of going to this place to meditate on how true humility and the annihilation of self can be reached. One day, he was in such despair that it seemed to him all he could do was to offer up his own life. He went to the very brink of the rock and wanted to throw himself down. But a comrade of his, young Zalki from Grodzisk, had followed him unobserved. Now he ran toward him, caught him by the belt, and did not stop comforting and encouraging him until he had talked his soul out of its grim purpose. When Jacob Yitzhak's teacher died, and he was made the rabbi of Lublin, Rabbi Zalka came to visit him. As he entered the room, the Tzadik took both his hands in his and said, "Rabbi Zalki, my life, I truly love you. That is because on my soul's first excursion on earth, you were my father. But when I recall what you did to me in Lizensk, I cannot wholly love you." His gaze. The Hasidim tell, when the soul of the seer of Lublin was created, it was endowed with the power of gazing from one end of the world to the other. But when it saw the great mass of evil, it knew that it could not bear this burden and begged to be relieved of its gift. Then its power was limited to seeing everything within a radius of 4 miles. In his youth, he kept his eyes closed for 7 years, save during the hours of praying and learning, so that he might not see anything unseemly. This made his eyes weak and nearsighted. When he looked at anyone's forehead or at his note of request, he saw to the root of his soul, and beyond it, to the first man. He saw whether that soul came from Abel or from Cain, saw how often, in its wanderings, it had assumed bodily shape, what had been destroyed or bettered in each incarnation, in what sin it had become entangled, and to what virtue it had ascended. Once, when he was visiting Rabbi Mordecai of Neskij, they spoke of this power. The rabbi of Lublin said, "The fact that I see in each what he has done lessens my love for Israel, and so I beg you to do something to have this power taken from me." The rabbi of Neskij replied, "The words in the Gemara hold for whatever heaven decrees. Our God gives, but he does not take back." Going blind. It is told, in Lublin the afternoon prayer was delayed even on the Sabbath. Before this prayer, the rabbi sat alone in his room every Sabbath, and no one was permitted to enter it. Once a Hasid hid there to find out what happened on these occasions. All he saw at first was that the rabbi seated himself at the table and opened a book. But then a vast light began to shine in the narrow room, and when he saw it, the Hasid became unconscious. He came to himself when the rabbi left the room, and he too went out as soon as he fully regained consciousness. In the entrance, he saw nothing, but he heard them saying the evening prayer and realized with horror that the candles must be lit and that he, notwithstanding, was surrounded by utter darkness. He was terrified, implored the rabbi to help him, and was sent to another city, to a man who was known to perform miraculous cures. He asked the Hasid about the circumstances of his going blind, and he told him, "There is no cure for you," said the man. "You have seen the original light, the light on the days of creation, which empowered the first people on earth to see from one end of the world to the other, which was hidden after their sinning and is only revealed to Tzadikim in the Torah. Whoever beholds it unlawfully, his eyes will be darkened forever." Landscape. When Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak was a guest in the house of Rabbi Baruch, the Baal Shem's grandson, that proud and secretive man who had once said of himself that he would be the supervisor of all Tzadikim, took him with him in his carriage when he drove to the ritual bath on the day before the Sabbath. On the way, Rabbi Baruch gave himself up to the creative strength with which he gazed at his surroundings, and the landscape changed in tune with his thoughts. When they got out of the carriage, he asked, "What does the seer see?" Rabbi Yitzhak replied, "The fields of the Holy Land." When they crossed the hill between the road and the stream, Baruch asked, "What does the seer smell?" He replied, "The air of the mountain of the temple." When they dipped into the stream, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov asked, "What does the seer feel?" And Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak answered, "The healing stream of paradise." What 10 Hasidim can accomplish. A young man stole away from his wife and parents-in-law to spend the Sabbath in Lublin. But hardly had he greeted the rabbi when Jacob Yitzhak, who had looked at him closely, told him to return to his own town immediately so that he might reach home before the beginning of the holiday. The young man begged and begged, but could not induce the rabbi to change his dictum, and so he went his way deeply disturbed. He spent the night at an inn, and while he lay there, unable to sleep, a group of Hasidim on the road to the rabbi of Lublin entered the room. They heard the man moaning on his bench, asked him about himself, and discovered what had happened. Then they got some brandy, kept filling their glasses, and drank to one another, and to him, and cried, "To life, to life." One after another took him by the hand, and then they said to him, "You are not going home. You are coming to Lublin with us, and shall spend the Sabbath there, and don't you worry about anything." They drank until morning. Then they all prayed together, drank to one another and the young man once more, and went merrily toward Lublin, taking him between them. The moment they arrived there, they went to the Tzadik and greeted him. The Tzadik looked at the young man and was silent for a time. Finally he asked, "Where have you been? What has happened?" When he had heard everything, the Tzadik said, "It was decreed that you should die on this Sabbath, and your fate has been averted. The truth of it is that no Tzadik can bring about what 10 Hasidim can accomplish." The bed. It was a known fact that frequently the seer of Lublin could not sleep in a strange bed on occasions when he was a guest in someone's house. And so, when Rabbi Yosel of Ostila heard that the Tzadik was coming to his town on his next journey, he immediately gave a devout and able carpenter the order to make a bed of the very best wood and to put into it his most painstaking labor. The carpenter went to the ritual bath, concentrated his mind on his work, and was more successful than ever before. When Jacob Yitzhak had accepted Rabbi Yosel's earnest invitation to stay at his house, his host conducted him to his room, where the bed shone out in all its newness, piled with smooth pillows and soft blankets. But with pained surprise, Rabbi Yosel later heard the Tzadik toss about on his bed with many sighs and realized that he could not sleep. For a while, he was utterly nonplussed. Finally, he offered his guest his own bed. The seer of Lublin lay down in it, closed his eyes with immediate and evident comfort, and fell asleep. Later, Rabbi Yosel mustered his courage and asked what he had found wrong with the bed a God-fearing man had made for him with the most zealous care. The Tzadik said, "The man is good, and his work is good, but he did it in the 9 days before the anniversary of the destruction of the temple. Since he is devout, he mourned for the temple unceasingly, and now his sorrow clings to the bed and exudes from it." Lighting the pipe. A Tzadik told, "In my youth I once attended a wedding to which the Rabbi of Lublin had also been invited. Among the guests were more than 200 Tzadikim. As for the Hasidim, you could not even have counted them. They had rented a house with a great hall for the Rabbi of Lublin, but he spent most of the time alone in a little room. Once, a great number of Hasidim had gathered in the hall, and I was with them. Then the Rabbi entered, seated himself at a small table, and sat there for a time in silence. Then he rose, looked around, and over the heads of the others pointed at me, standing up against the wall. 'That young man over there,' he said, 'shall light my pipe for me.' I made my way through the crowd, took the pipe from his hands, went to the kitchen, fetched a glowing coal, lit the pipe, brought it back into the hall, and handed it to him. At that moment I felt my senses taking leave of me. The next instant the Rabbi began to speak and said a few words to me, and at once my senses returned. It was then that I received from him the gift of stripping myself of all that is bodily. Since then, I can do this whenever I want to." Purification of souls. Rabbi Naphtali of Ropshit said, "I testify to this concerning my teacher, Rabbi Itzikel of Lublin. Whenever a new Hasid came to him, he instantly took his soul out of him, cleansed it of all stain and rust, and put it back into him, restored to the state it had been in the hour he was born." The casting off of sins. Once Rabbi Naphtali had missed going to the river with his master, the Rabbi of Lublin, for the casting off of sins. When the seer was on the way home with his people, they met Naphtali running toward the river. "Why are you running?" one of them asked him. "You see that the rabbi is on the way home, so what difference does it make now, whether you get to the river a little sooner or later?" Naphtali replied, "I am hurrying to gather up some of the sins the rabbi cast into the water, so that I may store them in the treasure room of my heart." Lighter. The Rabbi of Lublin once said, "How strange. People come to me weighed down with melancholy, and when they leave, their spirit is lighter, although I myself," and here he was going to say, "am melancholy," but he paused and then continued, "am dark and do not shine." The Little Sanctuary. One of the disciples of the Rabbi of Lublin told this, "My master, the Rabbi of Lublin, had not only the great disciples whom all the world knows, but also 400 who went by the name of village people, and had every one of them the gift of the Holy Spirit. Is dull?" They asked him, "If such a holy community existed, and the holy seer was their king, why did they not join in one great attempt to bring about salvation?" He replied, "Great things were undertaken." They interposed, "But why didn't the whole community work together?" He said, "When we were with our holy seer, we were in a little sanctuary. We lacked nothing, and we did not feel the sadness of exile, nor the darkness that lies over all. Had we felt it, we should have shaken worlds. We should have split the heavens to bring salvation closer. The obstacle. Once Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak confidently expected salvation to come that very year. When the year was over, he said to his disciple the Yehudi, "The rank and file of people either have turned completely to God or can, at any rate, do so. They present no obstacle. It is the superior people who constitute a hindrance. They cannot attain humility, and therefore they cannot achieve the turning." Payment. On one Friday evening, before the consecration of the Sabbath, the rabbi had retired to his room and locked the door. Suddenly it opened, and he came out. The house was full of his great disciples in the white satin robes the great Tzadikim used to wear in those days. The rabbi addressed them. "It is written, and repayeth them that hate him to their face, to destroy them." This is what it means. He pays his haters for the good works they do in this world in spite of themselves, in order to destroy them in the world which is to come. And so I ask you, given that the wrongdoer is greedy for gold, well then, he will receive his fill of gold. And given the wrongdoer is greedy for honors, well then, he shall have his fill of honors. But now, suppose the wrongdoer is not out for honors, and not for gold, but for spiritual rungs, or that he is out to be a rabbi, what then? Well then, he who is out for spiritual rungs will mount them, and he who is out to be a rabbi will become one in order to be destroyed in the coming world. The bright light. A number of Hasidim came to Lublin. Before they set out to go to the rabbi, their coachman begged them to take a slip of paper with his name on it, along with other slips of this kind, so that the rabbi might wish him well, and they did as he asked. When the seer of Lublin read the slip, he cried, "How brightly the name of this man shines out!" The Hasidim were astonished and asserted that he was a simple and ignorant man, and that in all the time they had known him, they had not detected any special virtues in him. "At this moment," insisted the rabbi, "his soul is shining out at me like pure light." When the Hasidim went to look for their coachman, they did not find him at the inn, and so they walked from street to street. Presently they met a gay procession coming toward them. First, musicians with cymbals and drums, and behind them, a crowd of dancing, skipping, clapping people. In the very middle, gayer and shouting more lustily than all the rest, came the coachman. In answer to their questions, he said, "When you had gone, I wanted to amuse myself a bit. So I strolled through the town and suddenly heard music and sounds of merriment from one of the houses. I went in and saw that they were celebrating the wedding of 2 orphans. So I celebrated along with them, drank, and sang, and had a good time. But after a while, there was confusion and quarreling, for it seemed the bride did not have the money to give the groom a prayer shawl, according to the custom and what was expected of her. They were just getting ready to tear up the marriage contract. Then my heart beat to bursting. I could not stand seeing the girl humiliated, pulled out my purse, and what do you think? There was just enough in it to pay for the prayer shawl. That is why I am so happy." The transition. A rich and powerful man by the name of Shalom, who was generally called Count Shalom, fell dangerously ill. His son at once set out for the rabbi of Lublin to ask him to pray for mercy. But when, after his long journey, he stood before the Tzadik and gave him the slip of paper with his request, Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak said, "Help is no longer possible. He has already passed from the sphere of ruling into that of learning." When the man reached home, he discovered that his father had died that very hour, but that, in the same hour, his wife had borne him a son. He was named Shalom after his grandfather, and grew up to be a master of the teachings. The lengthy lawsuit. The rabbi of Lublin once said to Rabbi Heschel of Komarno, who was a disciple of his, "Why do you never look up the Rav of the city? You would do well to go to him from time to time." Rabbi Heschel was surprised to hear these words, for the Rav, who had been nicknamed the Ironhead, was a declared enemy of the Hasidic way. Still, he obeyed his teacher and began to pray in the Rav's house every afternoon. The Rav received him most cordially. One day, a lawsuit was presented after prayer. When the parties involved had been sent out of the room and the discussion was underway, one of the judges took the part of the plaintiff, the other that of the defendant, so that the ironhead was to tip the scales. Rabbi Heschel was present and had followed the argument with the closest attention. It was entirely clear to him that the plaintiff was right, but he saw to his distress that the Rav inclined to the other side. He did not know what to do, and yet he could not sit in silence and suffer injustice done. Finally, he happened to remember a gloss to the passage in the Talmud, which presented his own interpretation of the matter as the right one. He fetched the volume of the Gemara, went up to the Rav, and asked him to expound the gloss. The ironhead seemed irritated and refused him on the grounds that this was not the proper time for giving an interpretation. But Heschel repeated his request so insistently that the Rav took the book from his hand and glanced at the page in question. He changed color, told Heschel he would expound the comment to him the next day, and dismissed him. The following day, when Rabbi Heschel inquired about the result of the session, he was told that the plaintiff had won the case. That same evening, the Rabbi of Lublin said to him, "Now you don't have to go to the Rav anymore." When his disciple looked at him in astonishment, he added, "Those two, the plaintiff and the defendant, had been on earth 99 times, and over justice was perverted, and both their souls continued to be unredeemed. So I had to send you to help them." The Rabbi of Lublin and the Ironhead. Rabbi Azriel Hurwitz, Rav of the city of Lublin, who was also known by the name of Ironhead, kept plaguing Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak with constant objections and reproaches. Once he said to him, "You yourself know and admit that you are no Tzadik. Then why do you guide others to your way and gather a community around you?" Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak replied, "What can I do about it? They come to me of their own free will, rejoice in my teaching, and desire to hear it." Then the other said, "Tell all of them this coming Sabbath that you are not one of the great, and they will turn from you." The Tzadik agreed. On the next Sabbath, he begged his assembled listeners not to give him rank and honors that were not his due. As he spoke, their hearts were set aflame with humility, and from that moment on, they followed him even more fervently than before. When he told the Ironhead of his efforts and their result, the Rav reflected and then said, "That is the way you Hasidim are. You love the humble and eschew the haughty. Tell them that you are one of the elect, and they will turn from you." Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak replied, "I am not a Tzadik, but neither am I a liar, and how can I say what is not true?" On another occasion, Rabbi Azriel Hurwitz asked the seer, "How is it that so many flock about you? I am much more learned than you, yet they do not throng to me." The Tzadik answered, "I too am astonished that so many should come to one as insignificant as myself, to hear God's word, instead of looking for it to you, whose learning moves mountains. Perhaps this is the reason. They come to me because I am astonished that they come, and they do not come to you because you are astonished that they do not come." The Rabbi of Lublin and a preacher. A famous traveling Maggid was once preaching in a city when word came that the Rabbi of Lublin had arrived, and immediately all the Maggid's audience left to greet the Tzadik. The preacher found himself quite alone. He waited for a little while, and then he too saw the seer's table heaped with the ransom money, which petitioners and other visitors had brought him. The Maggid asked, "How is this possible? I have been preaching here for days and have gotten nothing, while all this came your way in a single hour." Rabbi Yitzhak replied, "It is probably because each wakens in the hearts of men what he cherishes in his own heart. I, the hatred of money, and you, the love of it." Truth. A disciple asked the Rabbi of Lublin, "Rabbi, you taught us that if a man knows his own worth and casts honest accounts with his soul, then this saying of the people can be applied to him. To cast accounts is paying half the bill. How are we to understand this?" When merchandise is shipped across the border, said the rabbi, the king's seal is put upon it, and thus it is certified. So when a man knows his worth and casts honest accounts with his soul, then truth, the seal of God, is set on him, and he is certified. The way. Rabbi Ber of Radoshitz once said to his teacher, the rabbi of Lublin, "Show me one general way to the service of God." The Tzadik replied, "It is impossible to tell men what way they should take. For one way to serve God is through the teachings, another through prayer, another through fasting, and still another through eating. Everyone should carefully observe what way his heart draws him to, and then choose this way with all his strength." In many ways. Sometime after Rabbi Shalom, the son of Rabbi Abraham, the angel, had died, 2 of his disciples came to Lublin to study with the seer. They found him out in the open, saying the blessing of the new moon. Now, because he did this a little differently in some details from what their teacher had accustomed them to, they did not promise themselves much from Lublin and decided to leave the town the very next day. When they entered the rabbi's house, shortly after, he spoke words of greetings to them and immediately added, "A God whom one could serve only in one set way. What kind of God would that be?" They bowed before him and became his disciples. The reluctant hand. They asked the rabbi of Lublin, "Why does it say, 'And Abraham stretched forth his hand,' and right after that, 'and took the knife'? Is not the first part superfluous?" He replied, "Abraham had consecrated all his strength and all his limbs, that they might do nothing against the will of God. Now, when God commanded him to offer up his son, he understood this to mean that he was to slay him. But since all his strength and all his limbs were consecrated, that they might do nothing against the will of God, Abraham's hands refused to obey Abraham and take the knife. Since this was not God's true will, Abraham had to overwhelm his hand with the power of his fervor and send it out like a messenger who must do the errand of his sender. Only then could he take the knife." True justice. The words in the scriptures, "Justice, justice shalt thou follow," were interpreted in the following way by the rabbi of Lublin. When a man believes that he is wholly just and need not strive further, then justice does not recognize him. You must follow and follow justice and never stand still. And in your own eyes, you must always be like a newborn child that has not yet achieved anything at all, for that is true justice. The second mother. They asked the rabbi of Lublin, "Why is it that in the holy book of splendor, the turning to God which corresponds to the emanation understanding is called mother?" He explained, "When a man confesses and repents, when his heart accepts understanding and is converted to it, he becomes like a newborn child, and his own turning to God is his mother." Dialogue. The rabbi of Lublin was asked by one of his disciples, "Our sages say that God speaks to the community of Israel. As it is written, 'Return unto me, and I will return unto you.' But Israel replies, 'As it is written, Turn thou us unto thee, and we shall be turned.' What does this mean? What God said to them is so. For we know that the awakening from below brings about that from above." The rabbi replied, "Our sages say, a woman only enters upon a union with him who has made her a vessel. For in the first mating, her husband made of her a vessel to awaken her womanhood. And so Israel says to God, 'Make us your vessel once more, that our turning may waken again and again.' And that is why further on in the answer which Israel gave to the Lord, we read, 'Renew our days as of old.' By of old, the time before the creation of the world is meant, when nothing existed except the awakening from above. Sin and despondency. A Hasid complained to the rabbi of Lublin that he was tormented with evil desire and had become despondent over it. The rabbi said to him, "Guard yourself from despondency above all, for it is worse and more harmful than sin. When the evil urge wakens desires in man, He is not concerned with plunging him into sin, but with plunging him into despondency by way of his sinning. The wicked and the righteous. The rabbi of Lublin said, "I love the wicked man who knows he is wicked, more than the righteous man who knows he is righteous. But concerning the wicked who consider themselves righteous, it is said, they do not turn even on the threshold of hell, for they think they are being sent to hell to redeem the souls of others." The merry sinner. In Lublin lived a great sinner. Whenever he wanted to talk to the rabbi, he readily consented and conversed with him, as if with a man of integrity and one who was a close friend. Many of the Hasidim were annoyed at this, and one said to the other, "Is it possible that our rabbi, who has only to look once into a man's face to know his life from first to last, to know the very origin of his soul, does not see that this fellow is a sinner? And if he does see it, that he considers him worthy to speak to and associate with?" Finally, they summoned up courage to go to the rabbi himself with their question. He answered them, "I know all about him as well as you, but you know how I love gaiety and hate dejection. And this man is so great a sinner. Others repent the moment they have sinned, are sorry for a moment, and then return to their folly. But he knows no regrets and no doldrums, and lives in his happiness as in a tower. And it is the radiance of his happiness that overwhelms my heart." Patchwork. A Hasid of the rabbi of Lublin once fasted from one Sabbath to the next. On Friday afternoon he began to suffer such cruel thirst that he thought he would die. He saw a well, went up to it, and prepared to drink. But instantly he realized that because of the one brief hour he had still to endure, he was about to destroy the work of the entire week. He did not drink and went away from the well. Then he was touched by a feeling of pride for having passed this difficult test. When he became aware of it, he said to himself, "Better I go and drink than let my heart fall prey to pride." He went back to the well, but just as he was going to bend down to draw water, he noticed that his thirst had disappeared. When the Sabbath had begun, he entered his teacher's house. "Patchwork!" the rabbi called to him as he crossed the threshold. Alien thoughts. A man came to ask the rabbi of Lublin to help him against alien thoughts which intruded on him while he prayed. The rabbi indicated what he was to do, but the man went on asking him questions and would not stop. Finally, the rabbi said, "I don't know why you keep complaining to me of alien thoughts. To him who has holy thoughts, an impure thought comes at times, and such a thought is called alien. But you have just your own usual thoughts. To whom do you want to ascribe them?" Service. Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak was in the habit of taking poor wayfarers into his house and waiting on them himself. Once he had served such a man with food, filled his glass, and stood beside his chair ready to fetch him whatever he needed. After the meal, he took away the empty plates and platters and carried them into the kitchen. Then his guest asked him, "Master, will you tell me something? I know that you, in serving me, have fulfilled the command of God, who wishes the beggar to be honored as his envoy. But why have you taken the trouble to carry out the empty dishes?" The rabbi replied, "Is not the carrying out of the spoon and the coal pan from the Holy of Holies part of the service of the high priest on the Day of Atonement?" In the hut. A disciple of the rabbi of Lublin told, "Once I celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles in Lublin. Before the paeans of praise, the rabbi went into the hut to say the blessing over the 4 plants. For almost an hour I observed his violent movements, which seemed impelled by overwhelming fear. All the people who watched thought that this was the essential part of the ceremony. A feeling of great fear passed over into them, and they too moved and trembled. But I sat on a bench and did not take the subsidiary for the essential, but waited until all the restlessness and anxiety was past. Then I rose to see better when the rabbi came to the blessing. And I saw how he on the highest rung of the Spirit said the blessing motionlessly, and I heard the heavenly blessing. Thus, long ago, Moses did not heed the clap of thunder and the smoking mountain, where the people stood and shuddered, but approached the motionless cloud out of which God spoke to him. His clothes. Rabbi Bunim said, "The rabbi of Lublin had better Hasidim than I, but I knew him better than all the rest. For once I entered his room when he was not at home, and then I heard a whispering. His clothes were telling one another of his greatness." The harpist. In the very act of praying, the rabbi of Lublin would occasionally take a pinch of snuff. A most diligent worshipper noticed this and said to him, "It is not proper to interrupt the prayer." "A great king," answered the rabbi of Lublin, "was once walking through his chief city and heard a ragged old street singer singing a song and playing the harp. The music pleased him. He took the man into his palace and listened to him day after day. Now the minstrel had not wanted to part with his old harp, and so he often had to stop and tune it in the middle of playing. Once a courtier snapped at the old man. "You really might see to the tuning of your instrument beforehand," the harpist answered. "In his orchestras and choirs, our king has lots of people better than I. But if they do not satisfy him and he has picked out me and my harp, it is apparently his wish to endure its peculiarities and mine." Thanking for evil. A Hasid asked the seer of Lublin, "To the words in the Mishnah, man should thank God for evil and praise him. The Gemara adds, with joy and a tranquil heart. How can that be?" The Tzadik could hear that the question sprang from a troubled heart. "You do not understand the Gemara," he said, "and I do not understand even the Mishnah. For is there really any evil in the world?" The wedding gift. It was at the wedding of his granddaughter Hinda. At the very moment the gifts were presented, Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak put his head in his hands and seemed to fall asleep. The master of ceremonies called out again and again, "Wedding gifts from the family of the bride," and waited for the rabbi. But he did not move. All fell silent and waited for him to wake up. When half an hour had passed, his son whispered in his ear, "Father, they are calling for wedding gifts from the bride's family." The old man started up from his meditations and replied, "Then I give myself." After 13 years, the gift will be brought. After 13 years, when Hinda bore a son, he was called Jacob Yitzhak, after his grandfather. When he grew up, he resembled him in every feature. His right eye, for instance, was a little bigger than his left, just like that of the rabbi of Lublin.